Okay, are we live, Claudette?
I started the webinar.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I hope everybody can hear me and see me. I can see the participants coming in, so we'll just give a moment for all the participants to come in, and then we'll get underway in just a couple of minutes. Okay, still got people joining. All right. Well, look, we may get underway because, as you'll see, we have a very packed agenda to get through. So, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. We're coming to you live from a very frosty Paris. Winter has certainly hit, but it's a real pleasure to be here with you this evening, our time, and be talking about small island developing states, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries in the ocean decade. So my name's Alison Clausen. I'm a program specialist with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and I work in the Ocean Decade team, looking after bits and pieces of implementation of the Ocean Decade, including the calls for decade actions and various parts of the stakeholder engagement mechanisms. We have a really interesting session planned for the next hour and a half or so. It's really, as you would have seen from the Save the Date, focusing on how we can increase engagement of actors from least developed countries, from small island developing states, from landlocked developing countries in the ocean decade. As we know, these countries are really essential to the decade's success, and there needs to be really active participation, and not just as beneficiaries, but really as taking a lead role. So, this is a very strong priority for the IOC, for the Decade Coordination Unit, for our regional partners, and we're very keen to have a discussion, to have an exchange with you all to talk about what's already happening in the decade, and to really see how we can be doing things better in the future and giving you the support that you need. As I mentioned, it is a very packed agenda. We have about 90 minutes. I'd ask all our speakers to keep very strictly to the time limits if possible. I'm going to be quite mean about cutting you off if things go too over. And to the audience, when there's time for questions and answers, please do keep things as succinct as possible. The session will be, as I said, for about an hour and a half in two sort of big parts. The first part, for about the first hour, I'm going to give you some background information on the decade for those of you who don't know it as well. Talk about some of the key elements that are really needed to develop decade actions, with a particular focus on co-design, because this is one of the areas where we are hearing from you that you really need more information and more support. And then get some real on-the-ground examples of partners in SIDS or least developed countries who have already been through the process of developing decade actions. In the second part of the session, for about the last half hour, we're going to hand it over to you and really try and get some dialogue and some interaction about what you need in terms of support, which will help us then develop different mechanisms that we can work with you for the different calls for decade actions and mechanisms of the ocean decade. So anyway, we'll explain this as we move through it, but we hope you find it an interesting and rich session. Just some quick housekeeping before we jump in. Please do stay muted. I think most of you are muted anyway as participants. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, to share information, to say hello, to exchange things. But if you do want to ask questions to the speakers, either raise your hand or use the Q&A function that you'll find in the reactions button on the bottom. We'll be using Slido in the later part of the session. My colleague Claudette will explain this in more detail, but if you want to already have a look at it, you can go to the website slido.com with the hashtag Ocean Decade. But again, we'll give you more instructions on that. The session is being recorded, and we will post the recording on the website and share it with participants. And we will, of course, also send you the slides after the session. So without any further ado, let's jump in. To get things underway, I'm going to hand the floor to a dear colleague and a man who doesn't need any introduction, the IOC Executive Secretary, Vladimir Ryabinin, who is going to give us some opening remarks for the session this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alison, for these kind words. So I'm very, very happy to well, basically welcome you on behalf of IOC. IOC is Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. It's very difficult to pronounce, but I think we have to learn that, and that we can call us IOC. So you know why we are organizing this webinar. You know, ocean is important for everyone. I don't need to preach to you with that, but I think, you know, the opportunities related to the use of the ocean, to the protection of the ocean, are all very much science intensive. And we don't have any established mechanism to move forward the science in its totality, with its complexity. And because of that, we really need to organize ourselves. And the decade is a way of organizing and engaging and mobilizing all of us. And already we have more than 30 different programs of the decade, more than 160 different actions. But you know, we observe that the participation of SIDS, LDCs, LLDCs, you know, you learned that acronym, is not up to the level. And you know, the decade is, as some people call it, once in a lifetime opportunity. We would like to work with you and to open that opportunity for everyone, to be the leaders, not only the recipients, say, of capacity development, that sometimes is just acting unilaterally in one direction. We would like you to be the leaders. I think there is a fantastic opportunity to do so. For example, we have some funds through the AXA Research Fund. There is also an organization called Wissen in Germany, and there will be some other opportunities for us to organize ourselves and lead the science, the need for the ocean we want. The approaches to this is co-design, understanding the needs and opportunities, and this involves certain processes that we have acquired some knowledge about, you know, because we participated and also helped many people actually, to organize themselves into meaningful programs. So I think the time has come now to these three categories of countries to take the lead in the decade. We hope very much that it will be possible, and this really depends on you. What concerns IOC, we will do everything that is possible to enable that capacity for you. The decade coordination unit is at your service, so there are some means of consulting and organizing this work. So I think let's take full advantage of that workshop, webinar, and then after this, let's just get engaged into discussion and see how we can organize activities that are meaningful and taking SIDS, LLDCs, LDCs to the leaders of ocean science. Basically, I would like to say, I truly believe that this is possible, and people who will be speaking to you are really masters of that exercise. So let's just try to make it happen. Thank you so much, and good luck for the webinar. I will stay with you until the very end of that webinar. So if there are questions, I will be able also to participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, and very inspiring words as always. And I think we can all retain those words. To have SIDS, LDCs, and landlocked developing countries as leaders in the ocean decade is really the aim of a lot of the work that we're doing, and really what we want to have a conversation about during this session. So let's move into the first part of the session. We'll start off with hearing some background about the decade, what's an update of what's been going on, including what is already happening in the SIDS, and then hear from some specialists about some of the key elements needed to develop decade actions in the future, specifically co-design. As I said, that's really a focus of a lot of the decade actions, and examples from partners in SIDS and LDCs who have already been through the process. So I would like to introduce now another colleague, Julian Barbier, who is the coordinator of the Ocean Decade and the head of the Marine Policy and Regional Coordination section of the IOC, and of course, one of the masterminds behind the decade from its very early days to its current form. Julian is going to walk us through an introduction to the Ocean Decade and what is currently happening, including in terms of activities in SIDS. So over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much, Alison, for the elogious introduction, but this is teamwork as for everything, and also as what we're trying to do in the decade in creating collaboration across stakeholders and across nations. So very happy to be with you today, and greetings to all our colleagues from around the world. You've heard from Vladimir the ambition of the decade which basically started in January 2021, with the vision, the science we need for the ocean we want, and the mission, transformative ocean science solution for sustainable development. But what does it really mean? It means that we are not going for business as usual. It means that we want science to be generating knowledge, and we want that knowledge to be used by governments, by citizens, by companies to change our overall relationship with the ocean and put us on a path of sustainability. So you should really see this decade as a way to do things differently, to co-design actions, to create partnerships among different groups of stakeholders, which are not necessarily always involved in the design of scientific actions, and really about being solution-oriented. And in fact, the decade is very much an action framework that is organized around 10 most pressing challenges that are touching upon the ecosystem conditions, which are touching upon about the capacity of those ecosystems to deliver food and other type of services. It's about the infrastructure of science, the way we organize science in the countries, at the regional level, at the global level, by developing and establishing the appropriate infrastructure that we need to observe and understand the ocean. And finally, it's really about building capacities across all stakeholders, from the developed world to the developing world and the global south. And to do this, we do need a global environment to do this, and this is what the decade is trying to do. The decade will also provide a framework to achieve some of these outcomes through decade actions. And what do we mean by decade actions? Decade actions are generally endorsed programs, projects, contributions, and activities that are really put forward by stakeholders to address all these global challenges that I've mentioned. So these actions are in fact triggered by regular calls for actions that we organize twice a year, and I will of course say a bit more about that. And those call for decade actions are really the time to get the great ideas that people have around the world and translate them into actions. But of course, to do this, we need to have a working environment and the collaborative environment in place. And this is what we're also working on in terms of making sure that the national level is engaged in the decade. And this is absolutely critical, so that we have a really bottom-up process, and that the decade, even though it has these global challenges and objectives, needs to also be translated at the national level in creating a dialogue amongst the science, amongst the different sectors, and industry, for example. So to do this, we are promoting the concept of national decade committees to create this interaction in a kind of co-design way. And so far we are happy. We're slowly getting to a number of about 25 national decade committees that have been established. But of course, we would like to see many more, and of course, even more particularly in SIDS, LDCs and LLDCs. Working at the regional level is also very important in terms of creating collaboration across nations. So to do this, we have set up a number of regional task groups, and those are very much active in the SIDS region, for example, in the Caribbean and Western tropical region, in Africa, also in the Western Pacific region. I just want to highlight that one of the tasks of these groups is really to prioritize, but also incubate great ideas that are meaningful for the regions. So to do this, for example, in the next month, we will be very busy, as we will have 3 regional kickoff conferences for the decade, for the Western Pacific, for the Africa and the islands, and the Caribbean. And all of these are really focusing on incubating transformative solutions and forging partnerships. There's also a lot of work being done through those regional mechanisms in terms of identifying gaps in terms of capacity, in terms of data, in terms of research infrastructure. The other element in this working environment is the financing and the investment. Of course, even though the decade is not a funding mechanism, it's really about creating the conditions for finances and support to deliver those actions. And to do this, for example, we're exploring different pathways. We are engaging with philanthropy. We are developing a Decade Alliance, which really is a way to showcase and highlight, the contributions and the commitments of governments, of industry that are being put forward towards ocean science delivery. And all of these activities have a home. And since last month, that home is even more concrete and more operational. This is the Global Stakeholder Forum, which provides a space for all stakeholders to collaborate across disciplines, across themes, across geography, but also across type of actions. We have some actions which are more focused on research and, for example, are looking for collaboration on ocean literacy because they feel the need to really be able to communicate and create outreach from the science products that are going to be delivered. So all this interaction and collaboration is going through the Stakeholder Forum, and we hope it will increasingly become an important element. I just want to highlight maybe some of the programs that we have in place, and maybe this is the slide just before that, Claudette. I mentioned the call for Decade Actions, and we had our first call, which was launched at the end of last year. This resulted already in a set of endorsed Decade Actions. We have 31 programs that have been endorsed. Those are kind of global or regional programs addressing some of the themes that you can see on the screen: observations, prediction, modeling, mapping, focus on multiple ocean stressors, focus on the deep sea, the mesopelagic, which is an area which is very undescribed. Coastal resilience, also very important, I think, for SIDS, fisheries, but also, things like you don't think about when you think about ocean science, but here we are much broader in our terminology, but we also include indigenous knowledge, we include cultural values, we include ocean literacy. So we have 10 UN-led Decade Actions because the UN system is also coming on board with their own priorities. For example, we have FAO that's put forward a number of Decade Actions on food security and fisheries stock assessments. We have projects and we have also contributions. The contributions are very important. Those are basically the means that governments, industry, philanthropy are putting on the table to facilitate the implementation of those actions. And we also have regional programs, and I just want to highlight for a second for example, the program that has been put forward for both the Mediterranean region, but also the South Pacific regions led by our colleagues from the Pacific community, and also an important framework for stimulating and prioritizing actions and developing new actions. If we can then go to the next slide. I just wanted to maybe show you a number of examples of interesting programs and projects that got recently endorsed. We have, for example, a program which is building technical capacity in the South Pacific. And this is a partnership between Norway and the Pacific Ocean and Climate Scholarship, and then with the University of Norway and Bergen and the University of South Pacific. They are providing support for 24 PhD students in the Pacific SIDS to focus on interdisciplinary approaches. That's essential. We have a PACMAN. PACMAN is a Pacific Island Marine Bioinvasions Alert Network, which is actually led by IOC and the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. And it's really about addressing the threat of invasive marine species in SIDS through eDNA techniques and leading to the development of decision support tools. So, very, very important also as well in terms of innovation and using new technologies for addressing very concrete problems. We have the IntelliReefs initiative in the Caribbean region, which is about restoring reef ecosystems through innovations in new technologies and so on. So we have already a subset of interesting programs that I think are addressing particularly the SIDS. But I don't think this is actually enough, and I'll just take you to the next slide. If I could get the next slide, Claudette. Thank you very much. And we need to, as Vladimir said, we need to continue and really make sure that small island developing states, but also LDCs and LLDCs, which I think is even more of a challenge, to get them involved in the submission of decade actions. So we have an ongoing call for decade actions. This is number 2, which was issued in October, and which is going to run until the end of January. And this call will actually focus on 3 thematic areas. The first one is decade challenge number 1 on marine pollution, and then number 2 on ecosystem management, and then number 5 on ocean and climate nexus. So we are calling for international programs to come forward in this context. And we have also those existing endorsed programs that are also participating in this call and also trying to mentor the generation of projects that will come under some of those programs. As Vladimir mentioned, for the first time, we also launching some subset of those calls which have funding attached to it, and in particular through the partnership with the AXA insurance partner and the Memphis initiative, which is also quite innovative. And of course, we will want to replicate this approach in terms of getting industry, governments, making resources available directly for specific decade call for actions in the futures. So to wrap up, I think, beyond giving you a bit of an update of where we are in the decade, the purpose here is really to give you and point to some ways for you to engage in the decade. Clearly, the decade will not succeed if we have not managed to engage all countries of the world. It's really about inclusivity, it's about leaving no one behind. So we want to see much more support going to SIDS. Now, despite the high geographic and thematic coverage of endorsed decade actions, the reality is that when we looked at what came from the first call of decade actions, there were very few actions that were actually directly led by SIDS or LDCs and LDCs. So I think we need to address that issue. And it's also very much an issue of capacity that we need to recognize. And we need to provide solutions to that. So in a way, we very much like to find out from you, what are the priorities that you have in your regions? What are the good practices in developing some of those decade actions? What are the potential mechanisms for sharing this practice and creating collaboration across different SIDS nations or LDCs nations, for example? So the message is very clear. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts, so we can better tailor our support to you in the future and really ensure that we are moving all towards this movement, and the SIDS and the LDCs and LLDCs are part of this revolution. So with this, Alison, over to you, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Julian, for the very comprehensive overview of the decade, where it came from, why we're doing it, and where things are currently up to. And as you can see, there's a lot going on. And so please do get onto the Ocean Decade website, join the Global Stakeholder Forum, and you'll be able to find out more details. Just a quick couple of housekeeping things. I should have mentioned the Slido is not actually open yet, because it will not be open until the second part of the session. So my mistake. Please don't try and log on yet, because it will say the event is not open. Secondly, don't forget about the Q&A button down the bottom in the middle. We will attempt to have some Q&A sessions after the speakers. If we don't, we will take your questions and try and respond in writing. So moving on straight away to the next speaker, as we heard from both Vladimir and from Julian, co-design is really at the core of the Ocean Decade. We've heard a lot from proponents and partners around the world that there's still confusion about how to do co-design, what co-design is, how it fits into the Ocean Decade. So here I'm really pleased to let you know that we have three excellent speakers who are going to give some guidance and recommendations, very practical recommendations on how to carry out co-design in the context of the Ocean Decade. First of all, we have Angelique Poupineau, who's a lawyer specializing in the law of the sea and natural resources law and is a trained climate change negotiator. And she is the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. So we're thrilled that she could join us this evening from the Seychelles. She'll be giving her presentation with Sheena Talma, and she'll present Sheena, who is a marine biologist, as part of her discussion. And just to let my colleague Claudette know, Angelique will be sharing her slides as she's made some late changes to the slides. So Claudette, you don't need to share the slides. Angelique will share her screen and run through the slides herself. So over to you, Angelique.
Thank you very much, Alison. And indeed, greetings from the Seychelles. Just making sure we can share the slide. Yeah, okay. So given that we were given the opportunity to share some practical recommendations, I decided it would be best that we really practice what we preach and take rather a multidisciplinary approach and share this space with Sheena Talma, who is a marine biologist in the Seychelles, who has been leading much of the scientific work, as well as with different deep sea expeditions. I see we've just got some sharing.
Yeah, I don't think we can see your slides, Angelique. I'm just seeing a black screen. I don't know.
If we can
about
enable the sharing power in Zoom.
Let me see how.
If I may, what we see now is the MPR screen. It's not your screen, Angelique. So.
Yeah, I think Claudette, you may need to stop sharing so that Angelique can share.
It's actually indicating that host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, sorry about this. Let's see what we can do to fix that up.
Apologies for that, but in the interest of time, I will at least commence the presentation.
Yes, if you could do that, and we'll try and fix that up in the meantime.
Absolutely. So together with a group of interested parties, different scientists and professionals from small island developing states, we have sought to examine the challenges facing small island developing states, but also come up with practical recommendations, really focused on how to ensure that small island developing states are part and parcel of these discussions, because the challenges that the decade seems to be facing are not novel. They are challenges that is often pointed to, but at the same time, what we would like to do is really use real life examples seen in the Seychelles, but also weaving the voices of islanders within islanders. Apologies for that. Okay, it's still not allowing sharing. But having different islanders from different regions to really share what they see as potential for addressing the challenges and really making recommendations for collaborative approaches. So the one thing that's first, I think there is in many ways somewhat of a challenge when it comes to the participation of SIDS, but it shouldn't be thought that this is because that there's a lack of leading organizations in small island developing states. There very much are institutions who the basis of their work is ocean science, but of course within small islands it differs in size, sophistication of their facilities and dedicated specializations. So we have found, and we've done a bit of a mapping with regards to these leading organizations and their specialism of focus. And I think this is something that is critical to understanding how do we facilitate the leadership of leading organizations in SIDS by first off knowing where they are and knowing what are their specialisms and expertise. So that's definitely one of the things that is of critical interest. The other aspect that we've looked at as really important recommendations is there's often capacity challenges in small island developing states as it relates to research equipment, having infrastructure, and at the same time, it's possibly impractical for all SIDS to have, the most sophisticated facilities, most latest research equipment, and so on. And as a result, one of the recommendations we've sought to think about is how do we pool these resources and expertise together? How do we pool the use of technology? How do we pool human resources? And one of the ideas that came up from the research is exploring a permanent program providing SIDS a shared research vessel for use. That could be used perhaps on a regional basis or an ocean basin scale for conducting ocean research. We also think that there are some lab equipment, again, that should be pooled because they are inevitably very expensive, both to purchase and then maintain, and then having the expertise to use these. The other aspect is a need to co-design and co-deliver activities. Obviously, there is a need, and this is a call from the islands themselves, to really facilitate connections between potential partners and collaborators to solve scientific conservation and development challenges. What we often find is countries require something, they look locally, and perhaps they see certain gaps, although of course they would see expertise as well, and trying to think about who to reach out to and who to be able to provide this extra support. So this is definitely a recommendation where we are thinking about how do we provide these platforms to be able to connect and help people collaborate. The other aspect is oftentimes research is often driven by the donor countries or by those who with the funding that already impose or even reflect what they think is the research needs. And on this side, there's also a need for small island developing states, as well as many other countries, to think about what are our research needs and to come up with that needs capacity beforehand to be able to then use it as an effective tool to say, well, this is what we actually need, and work that with donors. One of the very impactful quotes that we've seen here is, we will see projects happening the wrong way. We get aid bombing, sometimes where people come to us and say, here is new equipment and a new portal, enjoy, and then leaves. It is not conducive to capacity building. This is where the needs assessment becomes so important. So really thinking about us internally and thinking about what are the needs of the country rather than being so dependent on, or so not dependent, but even so flexible to be just focused on what the donor or the body indicates that it wants to see. I'm going to give there we go. I've got a real life example that I want to really showcase as a good practice. So in the Seychelles, we have a seagrass mapping project, which brings about numerous partners, and it's listed there on the slide, but you have somebody who's the connector. Remember, we talked about the platform, very much the SACAT acts as that connector, the funding body locally that can already be informed as what people in the grassroots want to see. We have two academic institutions sharing knowledge, right? So the capacity is not one way. There's a two-way capacity development with the University of Oxford, as well as the University of Seychelles. And you also have local NGOs and international NGOs all working together to be able to map the entire exclusive economic zone of Seychelles as it relates to seagrass meadows. And this is one example where it's an example of the recommendations come to life. In the interest of time, I will hand over to Sheena to share her experiences, but only to say that there are already good practice that we would like to offer to the decade as examples that we can build off in addition to the recommendations. Sheena, over to you.
Thank you, Angelique. And, you know, as in all partnerships, sometimes there are hiccups, but it is those hiccups that kind of make, you know, it more memorable. So I am hoping that you are looking at my screen at the moment. And Angelique, actually, you put in a really good point of dependence, right? And that that feeling of dependence. And when I think of dependence, I often think of parachute science. And that's because, sorry, just need to change over. And that's because often we see dependence, especially on science expertise, as a symptom of parachute science, right? And parachute science is kind of the arch enemy of collaboration and cooperative partnerships. So as you highlighted, I mean, the seagrass example is a really good example. And when we talk about parachute science, we're talking about when scientists come from, you know, other countries and essentially do research within a country that isn't their own without empowering or including the people on the ground. So without it having meaningful, long-lasting impact. And there are quite a few papers out there about it. So I do advise you to, if you have some time, just have a look at them. And in these papers, especially one that we co-wrote with a couple of my colleagues earlier this year, we really focused on what are the things that we need to do to enable and be better at collaborating. There's, in the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. But what is really important and what should be your takeaway message here is you should be collaborating from the onset. When you have that idea, as researchers, that's what we need to do, is to include the people that we want to work with from the very beginning. So what are some of these examples, real life examples of research programs or you know, other kind of programs that occur on the ground, like Angelique has explained with the Seagrass project, that take that collaborative approach. So I'll focus on two very quickly. The first being co-development and co-production of a deep sea research program that happened in the Seychelles in 2019. And essentially a foreign organization joined up with the Seychelles government and were able to co-produce this research. And looking at it from a different perspective, a local organization based in the Seychelles Island Foundation, that work with a host of different expertise around the world, gaps that they do not have in their own environment, right? And to really co-create that partnership. So I'm not going to take any more time because I know we're running out of it, but it's not, parachute science isn't just, the onus of parachute science isn't just on the researchers, right? Recognizing that our systems have not necessarily been built to recognize the long-term benefits of co-production is really important. And importantly, financing, we need to incorporate the aspects of co-production when funding research and allow for it, like in the case with Memphis, who funds for researchers to be able to co-create their programs before it gets fully funded. And SECAT, which enables and empowers Seychellois to be able to do their own research on the ground in the Seychelles. But if there's one message to take away from our talk, it is that we love external collaborations, varied expertise, and especially when collaborators come together with funding. What we are tired of, however, and I'm speaking here from someone from a small island state, is that we are often painted as incompetent, lacking capacity, and unable to safeguard our own futures when our ocean is our biggest asset. I have been to the depths of Mother Ocean and I have witnessed her power, her ability to mesmerize, to heal, and to come back from the wounds that we inflict. Scarred, but still giving food and giving life. This is where the decade can really move us from the status quo and from business as usual and ensure that the projects that are under this umbrella are truly collaborative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you both, Sheena and Angelique. That was That was really, really very inspiring, very informative, and we have found a lot of information there. I think we're going to move straight on to the next speaker, but I've taken lots of notes and I have lots of questions to ask you as well. And of course, the Meal-Wisdom Initiative, great to hear it mentioned, as it is one of the supporters of the current call for Decade Actions. Just to note that we had a question about people looking for Sheena and Angelique in the Global Stakeholder Forum and not being able to find them yet. So we hope you will both join the Global Stakeholder Forum so that partners can find you through the Ocean Decade stakeholder ecosystem. But moving along in the interest of time, and we talked a lot there about the role of funders and resource providers. We now have Dr. Jason Landrum, who is going to speak to us about co-design and coming at it both as a specialist of co-design and ocean science, but also from a funding perspective. Jason is a program officer with the Lenfest Ocean Program at the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a grant-making program supporting scientific research that informs marine policy and decision-making. We've had a number of very long and very rich conversations with Jason and his colleagues about co-design and how organizations such as his can play a really strong role in promoting this through the Ocean Decade. So over to you, Jason, to give us your thoughts and experience on co-designing ocean science through the Ocean Decade.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Allison, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's a pleasure to speak at this forum and to hear some great some perspectives and thoughts from the previous speakers and others. I'm looking forward to it. As Allison mentioned, I'm Jason Landrum. I'm a program officer with the Lenfest Ocean Program. It's great to be here today. Next slide, please. And today, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our program and what type of work that we do. The Lenfest Ocean Program works at the science policy interface by identifying, developing, and funding useful and usable scientific research. At its core, we feel that science is more likely to support better management or conservation outcomes if it considers the decision-making landscape, answers decision makers' questions directly, and involves engagement with relevant stakeholders throughout the life of projects. Our work doesn't advocate for specific policies or decisions. Instead, it focuses on supporting and integrating scientific knowledge that informs marine policies and decision-making processes, basically giving science a seat at the table. Next slide, please. So first, how do we define usable science and co-design? You'll likely find a lot of different definitions and uses of these terms, but for a start, usable science can be defined as science required to meet the changing needs of decision makers. And this is taken from a science and policy assessment on research on climate handbook for science policy decision makers. Basically, it's science that's positioned to be useful to individuals making decisions in the government, practitioners that manage resources, or other stakeholders who have an interest in the resource. Next slide, please. And when we say co-design, what does that mean? Well, more simply, it means that multiple stakeholders should be involved in designing research projects so that the information created is readily understood, accessible, and available to inform decision-making. And those stakeholders can include a variety of different folks, including the scientists and researchers who produce the knowledge, but it also includes folks that can use the knowledge and are typically part of the decision-making process, like industry officials, conservation organizations, resource managers, and community members. While it seems obvious that all of these groups should be speaking with one another to understand the science required to inform decisions, unfortunately, they don't always talk, which can create barriers for the inclusion of new information and can ultimately lead to uninformed, undesired outcomes and environmental damage. Next slide, please. To illustrate this visually, let's walk through what co-design looks like and what it doesn't look like. And let's start with what it doesn't look like. Traditionally, scientific research has been disconnected from its application and decision-making. This general representation of that process, scientists and researchers identify interesting scientific questions, work together and execute planned research, and then create and communicate those results in peer-reviewed journals and other credible communication platforms. As you can see in this diagram, traditionally, it's been all blue, where scientists work on these problems independently of the stakeholders that would need this information. Next slide, please. And so once the science is completed and published, then stakeholders become a part of the process and enter the discussion about how to use that science. And so if it's up to the managers and practitioners and policymakers to find the information, oftentimes, next slide, please, this leads to barriers of uptake of that knowledge to inform those decisions. And so what we found is that often the managers and stakeholders are less likely to use scientific information in their respective decision-making contexts if they aren't familiar with the research approach, its methods, and how the results would translate to their information needs and decisions. So if you want scientific information to help inform an issue, this approach doesn't work all that well, especially without involvement and engagement from the beginning of those relevant stakeholders. Next slide, please. So what is co-design? Well, it's a complicated concept, but at its core, it's a more inclusive approach to involving multiple stakeholders in assessing information needs and identifying research questions and approaches that can meet those needs. It infuses direct feedback and interaction among scientists and researchers with decision makers to ensure that research projects are inclusive and interactive, and empowering people to generate creative ideas and communicate what is valuable to them. The hope is that the results of the research are more likely actionable. Next slide, please. So if we look at this model, the participation of individuals becomes much more diverse throughout the process, from the initial development of the projects on the left hand, and throughout the research phase and eventually publication of the results and conclusions that sometimes is co-authored by a variety of different individuals, including the scientists, but also including the stakeholders. Next slide, please. So with early, diverse, and inclusive engagement, science is more likely to be actionable and thus hit the mark of providing information needed for management, conservation, and restoration decisions. Next slide, please. So one of the main benefits of co-design would be to increase the chances that research results are understood and used. Under this main benefit, other important sub-benefits emerge as well. I'm sorry, could you go to the previous slide, please? Oh, next slide, please. Sorry, it looks like we're missing a slide. So the main benefit is to increase the chances of research results to be understood and used. There's several sub-benefits to co-design, one being the ability to apply unique approaches to provide decision-ready information. And this pertains to innovative technical approaches that are developed and employed beyond or not including the stakeholders where that information is necessary. Thank you, Claudette, for changing the slide. When these innovative technical approaches are developed, and these can be cutting-edge satellite geospatial mapping or genetics or genomics techniques, without early consultation and engagement with decision makers or stakeholders, they're less likely to be used, mainly because these are new ways of assessing natural environment and are unfamiliar to those individuals who need to use them. Another sub-benefit of co-design would be flexibility in adjusting changing needs. We live in a dynamic world that's ever changing, and consistent engagement with managers can help scientists and researchers respond to those changing information needs throughout the project and beyond. And another sub-benefit that we've identified is creating opportunities for shared learning and discovery. When all relevant stakeholders are included in the design and execution of projects, it also establishes a platform for those individuals to both learn and share knowledge together, but to transfer that knowledge to other groups. Next slide, please. So as a concrete example, I'd like to talk about a couple of projects that we funded in Hawaii over the past few years. For some context for the decision-making landscape, the state of Hawaii is in need of spatially explicit information that can inform two large efforts. One, a Marine 30 by 30 initiative, as well as a statewide restoration planning effort. The 30 by 30 initiative aims to select and sustainably manage 30% of nearshore ecosystems by 2030, while the restoration planning process aims to complement the 30 by 30 efforts by restoring damaged or declining areas across the islands. Both are underway and in different stages, but science is positioned to help inform those efforts. Next question, please. Excuse me, next slide, please. Oh, is there a previous slide to this one? Oh, sorry, I guess we're missing slides again. So I'll just the place-based management approach for these two initiatives requires state managers and their partners to identify areas that they can protect and restore. This requires information on where those resources exist, what conditions, and what stressors might be impacting. To address these needs, the Memphis Ocean Program supported Dr. Greg Asner to work with state managers and restoration practitioners to co-design research questions that would address these information needs. Essentially, they investigated where coral reefs were located across the archipelago, what condition they were in, and how they were responding to stressors like a marine heat wave that occurred in 2019. To do this, Dr. Greg Asner had developed a technical approach to survey reefs at spatial scales that were needed to inform these management decisions. Briefly, this method entailed flying over reefs and using remote sensing package that could map underlying coral reef structure and habitat. And essentially they could map out live and dead coral and other habitat characteristics like sand and algae. Next slide, please. The mapping efforts could generate maps of coral reef habitats across the island, but also at spatial scales that were relevant to management. And so you can see with this figure right here on the left, you see a visual image of an area of Hawaii. And to the right, this remote sensing package was able to characterize the different parts of habitat, including live and dead coral and other things like sand, algae, and other habitat characteristics. Overall, the data collected in these flyovers are being shared directly with state officials and other stakeholders involved in planning and implementing 30 by 30 and restoration. So it directly applied a novel technology to specific information needs. Additionally, the approaches also allowed Dr. Asner to respond to changing information needs that emerged during the project. For example, when a heat wave hit the islands in 2019, the maps were used to help verify field reports of coral reef areas that were undergoing bleaching. And lastly, these data and maps also help to meet the needs of Native Hawaiian communities who have been working with Dr. Asner to use these maps as a visual tool to assess and manage these reefs beyond the state government. So the analyses promoted shared learning and discovery among the government managers and NGOs operating in Hawaii, but also were supporting Native Hawaiian communities as well. Next slide, please. So as with the previous talk, there are available resources out there to help understand and implement co-designed plans for research. One of these will be the UN Decades expert staff and the supporting documents that they are producing now or have already disseminated and will continue to create moving downstream. Another resource that you can tap into is there is quite an extensive existing literature of different approaches and examples of co-design. Currently, we are there are a lot of different examples out there, and we are actually working on another manuscript to help explain this process, at least from projects that we have been developing or we have developed in the past, and to see how to do this work in the field and in action. The third is that among that literature and approaches and examples, there are scientists and researchers with experience in co-design and doing this type of work all throughout the world. And so that might be another resource to consider when examining this literature and having conversations like the one we are having today. Another example of resources is that there are boundary spanning institutions. And boundary spanning is a fancy way of saying folks that can understand the research and try to bridge the research with the policy and decision-making side. Our institution, for example, is a funding institution that very much focuses on supporting and empowering our grantees to be able to span the boundary between the policy and decision makers, as well as the research community of which they are positioned to represent through their research and their networks. And finally, I'd like to mention that there are examples from different boundary institutions like ourselves that produce and disseminate guidance questions and evaluation criteria for either funded work and or co-designed, co-produced work that we're involved with. We have published these guidance questions and evaluation criteria on our website, but we're also, again, including this in a manuscript that's currently in review. I'm happy to pass along any of this information to Allison and colleagues to disseminate to this group. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I'm very much looking forward to engaging with all of you in some interesting questions and to learn a lot about your approaches and your perspectives in this space, and to move forward to make sure that we are co-designing the science that we need for a healthy ocean.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was fantastic, and I think extremely complimentary to the presentation by Angelique and Sheena. I mean, some of the key words that jump out at me there from the two presentations are ensuring early engagement, ensuring that we've got country-led and not donor-driven decision making, good practices that exist, sharing those, sharing resources, and I think actionable research. I really like that phrase. I think that's exactly what the decade is all about. So thank you for that very rich discussion and the very concrete examples. And moving now into more concrete examples, as I promised at the outset, we have a couple of speakers who are going to talk to us about their experience in developing, co-designing and co-creating initiatives that were submitted to the first call for decade actions and endorsed as decade programs. So our first speaker is Katie Swapi, who is the coordinator of the Pacific Community Center for Ocean Science at the Pacific Community in Fiji. It's a position that Katie's been in since January this year. And before that, she was at the University of the South Pacific. She has extensive experience in capacity development and is very passionate, as those of us who are lucky enough to know her, very passionate about working at the community level on natural resource management. And Katie is one of the leads on the Pacific Solutions to Save Our Ocean program, which is one of the flagship programs that was endorsed through the first call for decade action. So over to you, Katie, to tell us about your experience as co-designing something for the ocean decade.
Okay, Bula Vinaka and warm Pacific greetings. Thank you for this opportunity to share our experiences on the development and submission of our decade program, the Pacific Solutions to Save Our Oceans. I'm Katie Swapi, coordinator for the Pacific Community Center for Ocean Science. Next slide, please. Let me start off by giving you a regional context of our Blue Pacific continent. We are 24 Pacific Island countries and territories with 42 million people. We also have a ocean space of 42 million square kilometers, with a combined 30% EEZ of the world's EEZ. So the Blue Pacific narrative captures the shared stewardship of the Pacific Ocean based on the recognition of our shared ocean identity, geography, and resources. It also recognizes that collectively we are stronger and resilient as large ocean states in our Blue Pacific continent. Next slide, please. So the Pacific Community, or SPC, it's a regional organization with 26 member countries and territories. And it's the regional hub for science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development in the Pacific. SPC works across a number of sectors, including ocean-related sectors. And so the Pacific Community Center for Ocean Science, or PCOS for short, was set up to bring together the ocean science within SPC to better serve the needs of our members. And so it's appropriate that SPC and PCOS is leading on the decade in the Pacific region, and to really use this opportunity to support our members for the ocean we want. Next slide, please. So how are we engaging in the Pacific? Well, the first World Ocean Decade Regional Consultation Workshop was held at the SPC headquarters in Noumea in New Caledonia in 2019. We had over 90 participants from 15 Pacific Island countries across the Pacific region. And the aim of this was to engage and consult with stakeholders to design what the UN decade should look like for us here in the Pacific, and also on identifying priorities for our region. We had representatives from Pacific Island governments, scientific organization, traditional and indigenous knowledge experts, youth representatives, and media partners, and they were all part of this consultation and involved in the initial design of our program. Following this, we also had a consultation with SIDS based in New York to get their input and their contributions as well in the program. Next slide, please. So on this slide here, you will see the timelines of national, regional, and international frameworks. I just wanted to highlight the framework for Pacific Oceanscape. This is a regional framework endorsed by our Pacific leaders in 2010. And at that time, it noted that little progress has been made on ocean governance, that there were no national ocean policies, no dedicated national institutions for ocean governance. But as you can see in this slide, since 2006, we've had an explosion of national ocean policies being endorsed and developed and endorsed, starting with the Cook Islands in 2006, and very recently Fiji. The latest is Tonga, who have just endorsed their ocean management plan. And so what we did as part of our core design process for this program was to do a mapping exercise of these national ocean policies to identify the priorities and synergies within these national ocean policies. And one of those that stood out as a priority includes the principles of integrated ocean management. All our countries and in their national ocean policies, they all aspire to and recognize the need for a comprehensive perspective on the management of our marine environment. And integrated ocean management, provides this understanding of the totality of ocean uses and pressures and supports the long-term and sustainable use of ocean resources. Next slide, please. And so for the first call of action earlier this year, we submitted this program, the Pacific Solutions to Save Our Oceans. The focus is on supporting the implementation of these national ocean policies in a joined-up approach for integrated ocean management across the Pacific. And the objective was harnessing science and knowledge, including traditional knowledge, which has come out very strongly in all our consultations. The three key themes of this program are on law and policy, science, and traditional knowledge and Pacific culture. On law and policy, it's ensuring robust legal instruments and policy frameworks are in place for integrated ocean management. And we want to do this by supporting the implementation of the national ocean policies of our member states, and also providing a space for regional dialogue and learnings on integrated ocean management. On science, ensuring improved decision support systems. We want to improve our ability and the capacity to access the science and turn it into application-ready tools for decision-making. And third is on culture and traditional knowledge, ensuring that all activities relating to this program consider and recognize specific culture, context, and traditional knowledge. We want to ensure that the traditional knowledge and practices that we have used and we continue to use are recognized as complementary knowledge systems to science, and also to integrate these knowledge systems, including science, into sustainable ocean management approaches and practices. Next slide, please. And so what we've done since then, since the endorsement, so this program was endorsed earlier this year. And so we have started next steps, and this is an ongoing process where we've participated in virtual live dialogues to highlight this program. And also we are continuing or starting at least a consultation on the program with our member states individually, but also in high-level dialogues presenting the program. Also to our regional partners, regional organizations, including local and international NGOs as well that are based in the Pacific. We want to also use this consultation process to start building a community of practice and also using these consultations to identify national leads. And we're hoping to use this as, the focal points perhaps for the national ocean policies. And also, just recognizing the value of champions is very, very important to drive the work at the national level. And we hope that this would also include our early career ocean professionals to build their capacity and mentor them as leaders for our Blue Pacific continent. And finally, resource mobilization. This is an ongoing process as we continue to look for support to implement this program in the next 10 years. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you all so much for listening. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them. Naka.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Katie. And we, certainly within the Decade team, and I know the Interim Decade Advisory Board as well, was so pleased to see this regional program as the first regional program that was endorsed as part of the Ocean Decade. And it's fascinating to hear the long history of how it came together with these, these multiple steps. And again, this early engagement and really strong focus on participation and diverse stakeholders involved. So as you know, we look forward to working with you very closely over the next 9 years to really help roll this out and make it a real model for other regions looking for regional programs. In the interest of time, we are going to push on because we've had so many great speakers that we're running late, as we always tend to do in these webinars. So our next speaker is Idem Mahu, who is one of the co-leads of the Global Ocean Core and Conveyor Program, which is another of the flagship Decade programs. Dr. Mahu is a senior lecturer of biogeochemistry at the Department of Marine and Fisheries Science at the University of Ghana. She has a very long list of research interests, including the land-sea interface, marine pollution, ecosystem connection to seafood safety and security, climate change and ocean health. And she's recently received recognition from the National Geographic Society as a 2021 Emerging Explorer. So Idem, over to you to tell us about the Global Ocean Core and Conveyor Decade program and your experiences, good and bad, in pulling this together in the co-design process as a decade action. We can't hear you, Idem. I think you are. Let me ask you to unmute from here.
Okay, all right.
There we go. Perfect.
Right. So good evening, everyone from Ghana. Thank you very much, Alison, for the kind words. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So I'm very delighted to talk to us this evening about the Ocean Core, or what we now call the Global Ocean Core and Conveyor, which is a Decade endorsed program now. So briefly, I'll talk about the genesis of the Global Ocean Core and Conveyor program, and then we'll talk about the lessons that, some of the lessons that I learned from the endorsement process. So right from the conceptualization of the program and getting it to the final stage of it getting endorsed. Yes, but I think that we cannot also end without also looking at some of the potential reasons why probably there was not a lot of participation from these developed countries and also small island states during the first call. I sent out a couple of emails to some colleagues just to find out why this was not, we didn't see a lot of us participating or leading projects. So I would like to just present a few of those potential issues or problems that were raised by some of our colleagues. Next slide, please. Yes, so the Global Ocean Core and Conveyors program is one of those programs that actually attest to the fact that small ideas can indeed be developed or can evolve to become big ideas when we work together, when we co-design. So the whole project started as a small summer school, coercion. Somewhere in 2015, the idea was actually conceived by Professor Brian Arbick from the University of Michigan. So he observed something that was really, really relevant to Africans. So he has been attending a lot of meetings, conferences, and what have you. But from his own personal observation, he realized that anytime he goes to these meetings, he doesn't see a lot of people coming from developing countries to come and present their research and findings to the other ocean, the global ocean community. So he thought that there might be a problem. So this led to his idea of conceptualizing the summer school on the coastal ocean environment in Ghana. Even though the school is in Ghana, it's actually focused on the West African region. So it started in 2015, but it's hosted in Ghana. And we have had participants coming from Nigeria, from Benin, and most of the African countries. We ran the school until about 2020, where we had COVID came in. So then there were issues with international travel. So we couldn't, the school couldn't be continued in person. So we switched on to even a virtual school. And with the virtual school, we were even able to organize the school twice every year. And basically what the school does is it brings experts from the US, from Europe, who team up with experts from the region. So Ghana, Nigeria, and other parts of the West African continent. And we train students. So we build their capacity right on the continent, and we are able to, expose them to the practical, the real issues that actually confront our coastal marine environment, and how we can develop solutions to address these issues. So we started the school, we went virtual. Then the Ocean Decade came, and we thought that, okay, so we could even expand this bigger, but not focusing just on West Africa, because from the virtual school, we realized that there was a lot of interest from other participants from the global South. So we thought that, okay, so why don't we make this a bit global and focus more on the global South, so we can have replicate summer school in other developing countries as well. So we did a couple of stakeholder consultations, and we came out with the Ocean Core concepts, which we submitted to the Decade for endorsement. But unfortunately, on our program was not endorsed during the first round, but we got really useful feedback from the committee to kind of expand the project a bit, because at that point they were looking for programs, and so there are certain criteria that programs should meet, and one of those criteria is inclusivity, and also it needs to also be global in scope. So we had a couple of meetings with Alison and other colleagues from the IOC UNESCO. And we worked on this to get to the global ocean core and conveyor, which is defined as a conveyor belt of global ocean science exchange. This is guided by a diverse steering committee and not tied to a specific institution or nation. We are recognized as internationally important and also effective group or program. We are focused more on knowledge exchange via long and short term program, and which are both in person and also virtually, inclusive of all people and ideas that advance global ocean science and its application. And of course, this is also powered by a team of dedicated scientists and students. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what are some of the lessons that I learned, or personally, from the observations that I made, being a scientist, coming from a developing country, one thing that I realized is very crucial for the development of decade programs is teamwork, or working together as team. And also we need to, and teamwork of course also promotes co-designing. So you cannot do it alone. You need to seek the ideas, you need to seek the views of other people. Ocean Core came out of a team of dedicated members who made time for all our meetings with no expectation for financial gains. We had so many meetings prior to the endorsement, some at odd hours because we were working with people from different time zones, but we were all dedicated. So we worked together to get to that point where we ought to be. ECOP inclusion was played a key role in the program. We were working with some postdocs and some PhD students who helped really or supported us with fresh ideas, and were always on the go to push our agenda. If we have meetings, they were there to organize and all that. And so we need to also take advantage of our early career ocean professionals. If we are planning to submit programs for endorsement, we need to work with them because they have the energy that we need to do some of these things. And also there was regular support from UNESCO IOC. They were very, very instrumental in shaping the proposal or the concept from its initial state to where it's got to. So sometimes we may be held back. We think that if we send projects and things, we may not get the support, but we need to just submit it and we will get the support. We will get feedback to refine whatever projects we are sending out there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so like I said, I threw a couple of emails out trying to find out why we didn't participate. We didn't see a lot of participation from our continent. And one of the key issues that was raised was the global nature of the pitch. So we tend to focus more on regional issues because as a continent, we think that we have some key challenges that we need to address. And so when you even look at our researches, they are focused on our regional problems like pollution, overfishing. And so when we saw that the program, call for programs, some of us felt that our ideas may not suffice, may not be strong enough to become a program. So that could have also led to why we didn't see a lot of people participating. Then also pushing force from our institutions. Some of us also feel like we don't have the institutional support. So we need to be able to lead a project, to be able to lead a bold idea, a big idea. Some of us feel like we need administrative support, human capacity, laboratories, equipment, funds, what have you. We don't have that. Taking up leadership roles and positions. We lack the confidence sometimes, so we are not able to do that. My earlier colleague talked about parachute sciences and sciencing. We have colonialist effects. Some of our colleagues also mentioned mistrust. So we tend to be competing among ourselves rather than, collaborating to do things together. Apathy is one of those issues, lack of interest, preference for consultancies, because sometimes, yes, when you compare the salaries that people from these countries earn to other parts of the developed countries, they earn less. So they tend to push more of their energies into things that will give them extra income. Then also our ECOPs are sometimes also busy. They are engaged with so many administrative issues so that they don't have time to, work with us to develop some of these programs or get to the stage that we ought to be. So yes, these are just a few of the potential reasons that were raised. And on that note, I would like to thank you all for listening to my talk, and I welcome any questions and suggestions from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ada. Oh, sorry, I might just put you on mute. So I'm hearing myself in echo, but thank you so much for that. That last slide is fascinating. And thank you for taking that initiative of going out to colleagues and friends and getting some of that feedback, because that's also something I think we'd like to explore with you in more detail, to hear really what people are thinking and feeling about the process of submitting calls for decade actions. We need that information to have a system and mechanisms that are adapted to people's needs and wishes. So a quick reality check in terms of the timing. At the outset, I said to all the speakers, I'm going to be very strict and mean with timing, but I think the discussions and the presentations were so rich that I didn't want to cut anybody off. But the result is, of course, we're running out of time. We are going to adapt, obviously, the last part of the webinar quite substantially. I'm going to ask your indulgence to run 10 minutes over time. I see that the participant numbers are remaining very steady, so hopefully that means you're very interested and not looking to drop off, but we're just going to try and run 10 minutes over time. Of course, if you can't stay, the link to the full recording will be shared. We had 2 videos from the heads of our Asia Pacific and Caribbean regional subcommissions. We're not going to show those now. We'll include the links in the package that we send to you, so you can watch those videos and learn about what our colleagues are doing in those regions to support Decade. We will have the head of the IOC Africa regional subcommission, who will talk very briefly in just a moment about what is happening in Africa. And then we will go to a very quick interactive session, which will just be essentially a Slido poll to get a very quick overview and feedback from you on some of your feelings about what's been discussed today. We're going to follow up with a survey that we'll send to you via email, which will have some of the other questions to solicit the additional information on your support needs. So we'll sort of stagger that and do that offline through a Google survey or a similar survey document in the days that come. For the question and answer, please do keep writing the questions and answers in the Q&A panel at the bottom, and our panelists are in there busily typing answers to those, because I don't think we're going to have much time, unfortunately, for live Q&A as well, but certainly do use that to engage with the panelists, because I know they're waiting for your questions. So with that, let's jump over directly into a quick update from Mika Odido, who is, as I said, the head of IOC Africa, who is here with us live, who is going to, in 2 or 3 minutes tops, tell us a little bit about what is happening in IOC Africa in terms of enabling activities for the Ocean Decade, and then we will move into the interactive part of the session. So over to you, Mika. Thank you for staying up so late. I understand you're coming to us from a hotel room in Namibia, so we're looking forward to hearing what you can tell us about what's happening in IOC Africa.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'd really like to start by acknowledging the very useful information that we had from Adam's previous presentation, especially our last slide, which really resonates with our experience in the region. The countries in the region have, in recent years, really recognized the ocean economy as a new frontier for development. Next slide, please. The African Union Commission adopted Agenda 2063, which is a blueprint for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse of the future through inclusive sustainable development. And the plan recognizes that the African blue economy shall be a major contributor to continental transformation and growth. And in addition to this, the African Union has also adopted an integrated maritime strategy. Is declared the African Decade of Oceans and Seas well before the UN declared its Decade for Ocean Science. It also declared the 25th of July as the African Day of Oceans and Seas. In addition to that, it's recently adopted a blue economy strategy. I'll briefly highlight some of the activities we've held in the region as part of the planning process for the decade. Next slide, please. Early last year, we organized a regional workshop on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development to look at what are some of the priorities that we should address in the region. And the workshop came up with 5 recommendations. First of all was on harnessing the demographic dividend through focused ocean literacy programs, supporting skills development and mentoring. This was in recognition of the fact that we have a relatively young population with more than 60% of the continent's population below the age of 30. We normally say Africa is young and blue. Secondly, the meeting agreed on the need to have a catalyzed research and linking the research results to societal income. The third recommendation was improving the quality and quantity of research outputs and using this to transform lives through innovation and robust application of ocean science. The fourth recommendation was on strengthening ocean research through stronger integration of sciences, greater investment in ocean observation systems, and improved science policy interface. And the fifth recommendation was on establishment of university-based ocean innovation incubator hubs supported by the private sector. Next slide, please. Building on this, we have been working on a series of initiatives to try and develop programs for the decade. We are planning on a regional kickoff workshop for the decade next month, 13th to 15th of December in Alexandria, Egypt. And to contribute to this process, we are currently working on a regional gap analysis with the West Indian Ocean Marine Science Association to identify priority needs for Africa under the Ocean Decade and identify the key barriers, opportunities, and actions to meet these needs. We are also working with the African ECOPS groups on developing a regional Ocean Decade booklet, and we are planning a pre-conference workshop from 6th to 8th of December, which is organized together with the ECOPS from the region, which will look at national decade strategies and priorities, the regional resource of the regional gap analysis, and come up with the draft regional priorities that will be considered by the kickoff conference. The next one, I think, is the final slide. Yeah, just giving the address for contact in case you'd like to participate in some of these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mika, and thank you for being so succinct in your remarks. And of course, we'll stay tuned for more information on social media and the Decade website about the Africa Kickoff Conference from the 13th to the 15th. There'll be a lot of focus on co-design, on youth, on early career ocean professionals. And there will be more information coming soon on how you can join some pre-conference workshops as well as the conference itself, as it will all be both live and virtual. So coming to the end of our session now, as I said, we'll ask your indulgence for 10 more minutes. I would like to hand over to my colleague Claudette Spiteri, who has recently joined the Decade team to provide scientific and technical support to SIDS, to least developed countries and landlocked developing countries through the calls for Decade action processes. Claudette's going to run us through a quick interactive exercise on getting some of your feedback. And as I mentioned, we'll follow this up with a survey that we'll send around by email that will allow us to explore some of these issues a bit further. So over to you, Claudette.
Yes, hello. So good evening.
So for this second part, we an session with the main objective to have a discussion on the action co-design support facility, and also to collect tangible ideas and proposals on the type of support that will be required in order to enhance the leadership and engagement from SIDS, LDCs, and LLDCs. I prepared a few recap slides so as to summarize what we've been hearing. Here, as Julian mentioned at the very beginning, and as you can clearly see from this global map, there is there was a clear underrepresentation and lack of organizations from SIDS, LDCs, and LLDCs as lead partners. And also, if we zoom in the regions, you see that lack of engagement is very clearly. And therefore, as we already heard, the focus of the second for the second call of the GATE actions, this was given some priority. So in order to enhance leadership and also to increase the actions on the ground from these regions. We also heard about the importance of collaborative and co-design approaches with some examples from some real examples. And also we heard from Mika about regional activities, relevant regional activities. So as you heard, we did prepare an interactive session with Slido. We prepared 2 polls. In view of the time, we're gonna go straight to the second poll. And the idea is to try to get your opinions, to collect your opinions on these 2 key questions. One is, what are the key limitations, challenges, and needs? I think we've heard that already. So we will skip that. And we will focus on the second one, which is what could be provided in terms of support and solutions in order to address these needs. Therefore, I invite you to go to this link in Slido, which you will find on the chat. Some time to get there. So the question we would like you to answer is, if financial resources were available to support SIDS, LDCs, and LLDCs in responding to the call for the GATE actions, what would you recommend to use it? And which, in your opinion, in other words, which in your opinion are the top priority actions to address the needs? Give you some time. It's also interesting to see the results coming in real time. So essentially, there are 7 options. Okay, I think, is it any better?
That is much better, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. And with that, I think we can stop with the voting. I don't see any much more movement. So do I see here still increasing 27 because you have the option to select 3 of the 7 options. Okay, so we can start with the poll and look a bit at the results. So I think what we have as the most preferred option is investing, putting resources in establishing partnerships and networking, and which is more or less roughly attributed the same importance as training. Training here, we just give an example. Training of trainers. However, as you know, there are different types of trainings. Just to go through the other options, another option that was also highly voted is the idea to have technical support, mentorship from the Decade team in order to develop actions. So to develop programs, Decade programs and projects. The other options that were, let's say, less voted, human resource development, online and distance training, learning, transfer of marine technology, series of targeted incubator sessions that, following the example of for instance, Westpac. We also added an additional option in case we missed something, but it looks like I can conclude that the other 6 options captured more or less the main types of support. I would like to invite the participants who would like to comment on that or to highlight something very specific on this outcome. Does it come as a surprise? Do you recognize it? Do you think, for instance, that other options should also have priority?
So please raise. Whoops. Yeah, sorry. Please raise your hands. We're going to have to be very, very quick, obviously, but it would be great to hear live from some of our speakers. We have Paula McGrain and Alexandre Ganachot. So Paula, if you're there, if you would like to take the floor, let me just unmute you, and please feel free to comment.
Hi, Alison. Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Hi, Paula.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize you were actually going to pop into me, and I'm just working in the background as well. But just to say, I've really enjoyed the session to date, and it was fantastic to hear from Sheena earlier on. I just thought what the lady said there was brilliant, and it really brought home, you know, I suppose the reasoning behind how it's so important to kind of co-design the decade going forward. But I've nothing else to say.
Well, we'll take that compliment, and thank you very much. And more a compliment for Sheena, though, but agreed, it was a fabulous presentation, which of course will be shared. So thank you very much. Moving on to Alexandre Ganachot, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If you had a comment you would like to share with the group.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I think I pressed the wrong button. Okay,
I
sorry, that was my fault.
Thank you for the very nice presentation. Yes, one comment I wanted to share is the need that was first here in line for networking, the need for help for networking. I work in the Pacific, and the stakeholders, the partners or potential partners are really submerged with demands of co-construction. And I think it could be useful to have some kind of support or coordination from the Ocean Decade, because the Ocean Decade generates many projects and then many solicitations for collaborating. So since the Ocean Decade has the information about who is doing what, it could be useful, easier in terms of method to approach partners, or just a kind of database of knowledge who is soliciting who, so that it becomes a bit coherent, a bit more coherent from the different demands.
Yep. Thank you very much, and an excellent comment. I would say that the Global Stakeholder Forum will eventually play this role. It's very new. It just came online a month or so ago, but this is exactly the sort of role that we see it evolving to take on, and we need your feedback on how to evolve that forum to really provide that sort of database of partnerships, that centralized place for solicitations, collaboration. So again, I don't want to overplug it, but please do join up, and please, if you see ways that it could be improved, there's lots of functionality of that forum we're not yet exploiting. So please do let us know, and it will of course be something that builds and is tailored over time. But yeah, an excellent point. Thank you very much. And maybe one last one to finish off before we go to our closing. Sheku Say, again, apologies for the, I'm sure, mispronunciation, but the floor is yours to give us your thoughts. Oh, for some reason I can't unmute. Let me see. You should have received a button that you may need to click on to unmute yourself. No, does not seem to be working. Apologies for that. Maybe you could put your comment into the chat if you're there, because I cannot seem to unmute you. Anyway, probably time to finish up. I've gone over the 10 minutes that we said. So I'm going to quickly wrap up and hand to the IOC Executive Secretary for some very last closing words. But just a huge thank you from all of the Decade Coordination Unit and the Decade team, to all our speakers, to the participants for staying online. For many of you, it's quite late. For others, for once, we managed to get something in your time zone. Thank you, of course, to the team here, to Claudia and Julie, who've done so much of the behind the scenes work. We hope you found it interesting. We'll follow up with emails to all the registered participants with the slides, the links, and a survey to really explore in a bit more detail the results of the poll that Claudette put up. And of course, look on the website, check out the call for Decade Action, sign up to the Global Stakeholder Forum. There are lots more exciting things coming up with the decade. Thank you very much. And over to you, Vladimir, for the closing words.
Thank you very much, Alison, all organizers, all participants. I'd like to conclude with the message that we heard from Angelique and Sheena. No parachuting webinars. Today is just the start of a very big enterprise engaging you towards leadership in the Decade projects. But I would like to conclude with one thought that struck me. Well, we have co-design in science, and I think co-design under the Decade of Ocean Science is different, because co-design under the Decade of Ocean Science is focused on solutions that are required for local communities and for governments. So there was a question by Silvana and Tat on how to engage local communities. And I think, despite I don't know the precise answer to this, my attempt to respond to this question is that the issues that we're trying to solve are most important for local communities. Because of that, the co-design of scientific activities is such under the Decade that in the focus is the interest of local communities and governments. You have the upper hand, and the science is supposed to listen to you and come up with solutions in the iterative mode. So please formulate the questions, then engage the science. We will help you with that. And with that, we will
Oh, apologies. We seem to have lost Vladimir. I'm not sure where he's gone. No, I think we have definitely lost him. So many apologies for that. That seems to be another technical glitch. But we I think we hopefully got the gist of his message. But with that, we are over time. So thank you all very much, and we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to following up by email in coming days. So thank you all very much, and have a lovely rest of the day, evening, morning, and we will see you soon. Goodbye.